Okay.
So I'm going to start.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
the mic is here.
exactly. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second keynote lecture with Liliane Louvel, who is Professor Emerita at the University of Poitiers. She is the president of the International Association for Word and Image Studies and a board member of the International Society for Intermedial Studies. She was the former president of French Association of English Academics, SAES, and the European Society for the Study of English. In 2011, Professor Louvel received the Chevalier de l'Ordre de l'Or Légion d'honneur. And if, like me, which will be evident to you, you don't speak a word of French, but you're curious to know what the honors are in reference to, I Googled this one. In France, this is the title of Knight in the Legion of Honor, where awardees have distinguished themselves, I quote, by a minimum of 20 years of public service or 25 years of professional activity with eminent merits. Among these eminent merits, of course, are the 5 books that Louvel has published on contemporary British literature and word-image relationships. 2 of these have been translated from French into English as Poetics of the Iconotext in 2011 and The Pictorial Third, an essay into intermedial criticism in 2018. Her monograph on Stanley Spencer is forthcoming in 2025. Louvel also co-edited the volume Intermedial Arts, Disrupting, Remembering, and Transforming Media, a book which may be of particular interest to the audience gathered here today, given the focus of our conference. And a copy of the book is available on our book display table for browsing next to the registration desk. Louvel has further edited several collections of essays published in journals such as Word and Image, EJES, the European Journal of English Studies, among numerous others. In particular, in the 2014 issue of Word and Image entitled Musing in the Museum, co-edited with Karen Brown and Lawrence Petit, may be of a special interest. Liliane has also written numerous articles and book chapters, and I'll just mention 2 of them briefly. In a 2018 essay published in the journal Poetics Today, her essay Types of Ekphrasis, an attempt at classification, is part of a special issue devoted to considerations of contemporary ekphrasis, where Louvel and other scholars offer reassessments of ekphrasis, attending in particular, as the editor notes, to how interrogating ways of seeing has acquired a new urgency in today's media landscape. In 2022, Neil and I, along with our colleague Cheryl Julia Lee, had the opportunity to work with Liliane when she graciously accepted our invitation to contribute an essay to the Routledge Companion to Literature and Art. And it's a volume that in some ways has led us here to this conference today. So in her essay, The Strange Case of Notional Ekphrasis, Louvel posits ekphrasis as an encounter between arts, between media, an intermedial relation that sets up a dialogue, an exchange that facilitates an aesthetics of surprise. She focuses in this essay on the notional or invented work of art. So for instance, Dorian Gray's portrait, superimposed paintings, as in John Banville's Ghosts, artworks, which are what she terms word painted by the narrators and authors that test the limits of one art playing off or against the other. Please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Liliane Louvel.
Thank you ever so much, Michelle, whom I've learned to appreciate and whose company is very good. And thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Neil, and all the staff and the wonderful organization, incredible organization. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, everybody, and Alice during the summer. Right. Well, I can read, it's not too bad. So today, I'll be very happy to receive your feedback because I'm trying to do something building on what I wrote about Ekphrasis and on the special issue of Poetics Today, which was the publication of a particular seminar in Berlin conveyed by Renate Broch, where I met Gaby Ripple. So I will start by saying there are multiple ways of introducing the intermedial conversation between word and image, literature and art, be it present or notional. Now, I will concentrate today on painting the age-long companionship of poetry and literature. Ekphrasis may have its own uses when it provides all kinds of knowledge, opening up into different way of exploring the human psyche, but also exploring the links between art, religion, politics, or social issues or matters and stakes and challenges. Although very useful in 2005, I found the reference proposed by Irina Rajewski as a reference sort of exchange. I find it the term too passive, for it misses the fact that an interactive and complicated operation is at work here, and that transposing or transmuting the visual work at its origin into another medium is always full of risks. Hence, exploring the paradoxes of intermedial or interartistic and interdisciplinary exchanges requires careful reconfiguration. I will try to explore this. So you'll see that my talk, maybe it will be too long, I will have to cut some, but anyway, my talk will explore several directions, and I will start with a quick introduction and the observation and state of the art. Then I will offer examples taken from recent publications. I will re-examine critical ekphrasis I define in the Poetics Today publication, working towards a reconfiguration, and I will offer an interdisciplinary collaboration and on a generic constellation, which is something yesterday I noticed in your paper, constellations. I thought, oh my God, I thought I had a great idea. Anyway, so I will re-examine those and tell you about that. Right. Right. So I propose in the introduction to move, but I'll go quicker than all this, to go beyond ekphrasis towards art history, to go one more step in our ekphrastic encounter in memory of David Kennedy. I was invited in Hull just at the very last conference. Now, what I propose to offer today is to go beyond ekphrasis and reconsider to what extent we can reconfigure its use as a transdisciplinary instance of intermediality, put to use to reconsider the interrelationship between media, ekphrasis being a kind of intermedial mediator. To put it simply, the huge use of the ekphrasis, but not only, way of introducing art in literature, what David Kennedy saw in terms of encounter, can be construed as more than an encounter, but as a strong collaboration between literature, art history, developing into a hybrid multimedial discipline. We are no longer seeing it in terms of rivalry or paragony. I have already described what I called critical ekphrasis, already working in the direction I proposed today, but I needed more time, a research, as well as a theoretical encounter to move one way forward. And so I proposed to venture and take into account another use of art in text and ekphrasis, not only submitted to a narrative use, but per se for itself. I will try to demonstrate that art history and literature have more than one thing in common, which could inaugurate a new critical generic possibility, and I will venture a theoretical proposal, modest proposal. Well, so I will have to start with telling examples saturated with art history. Then I will reopen the case of critical ekphrasis, the combination of art history and literature, and then we'll find a new model of writing history and critical writing. So observation, we have to acknowledge and observe that the relentless, ongoing, massive presence of ekphrasis and artistic developments in British and French, even Japanese or Italian literature, not only in specific paragraph devoted to the description of real or notional paintings, but also to the presence and the discourse of art historians, art critics, painters, gallery owners in a significant way. What we often call the art word spills over book production. For some critic, this might be due to the overall easy way of accessing pictures, as Gabby Ripple wrote. I have many quotations. I won't read all of them for time's sake, but you can look at them. And in some of them, I have highlighted the significant words. So you can see that Neil Murphy acknowledged also, quote, one of the dramatic shifts in literary terms that has occurred in recent decades is what Renate Broch characterizes as an astonishing upsurge of ekphrasis in popular novels. Renate Broch, in her introduction to the issue of poetics today, which she coordinated, argues that it has become necessary, quote, to review the narrow notion of ekphrasis that adheres to its standard definition as, quote, the verbal representation of visual representation, which is heaven's, as you know. She recalls that David Kennedy, among other theorists, felt there was high time to revise the limited idea of representation of visual representation. Neil Murphy also noted what he called, that's very important, the expansive use of ekphrasis by contemporary writers, even suggesting that other writers impel one to reconceive of the limits of ekphrasis, especially because its use in fiction is often more expansive, more fully integrated in the extended narrative form. He values the ekphrastic saturations of novels by writers like John Banville, A.S. Byatt, and Alice Smith. This is what I will try to explore, a reconfiguration of the use of ekphrasis, its ever-growing presence and use to follow Neil Murphy, together with its material textual expansion in recent novels, the space it takes up, and the specialized lexis it uses, bringing it on the verge of art, history, writing, which is my contention. So we could sum up their expansion in terms of frequency, textual length, scope, and in terms of competent discourse. I have already developed the notion of ekphrastic moment. That is the idea of not narrowly limiting or restricting the scope of ekphrasis to its textual limits, but also extended it to its before, its prelude, before it is manifested in the text, and it's after the consequences of its appearance, not only to the reader's mind, but also from the point of view of the narrative fallouts. A few recent novels confirm this trend. To quote but a few, Jesse Kellerman, The Brutal Art, Siri Utzfeld, The Blindfold and What I Love, Chris Whitaker, All the Colors of the Dark, Danny Haywood, Lonsdale, The Portrait Painter, Thomas Schlescher, Les Yeux de Mon Amour's Eyes, Haruki Murakami, Killing Commendatori. I love this one too. I love all those. In those books, whole chunks of art history and art figure as main subjects and not only as adjunct ones serving a narrative function. Not only long paintings, depiction, but also extensive historical and material comments on the paintings are developed all along the books by competent figures. The art of writing via the praxis of ekphrasis, to quote Stephen Cheeke. And related material is that put to work, and I will argue that the expansion of ekphrasis alters the jar of the text, starting with the textual space it takes up, the knowledge brought to bear, and the consequent issues at stake. Even looking at book titles, and often their covers, already alerts to the use of art in the book. Well, you all know Girl with a Pearl Earring. It's a case in point. It offers what we could call a minimal ekphrasis. But both this novel and Killing the Commendatore are examples of book-long plot developments based on a painting distilled all along the book. So, examples: defining high degree of pictorial saturation novels infused by art history first. In this kind of art history imbued novels, the description of works of art goes together with that of their material components, the way the colors are ground, what they're made of, the canvases, their preparatory layer, sub-layers, their proportions, the composition of the paintings, color grinding, the use of techniques like perspective, chiaroscuro, the disposition of the characters, or the genre, still life, lighting, and the artist's studio, all in all technical details, which usually are the field of art history per se. That's what Alice quoted yesterday when I listened to you and you gave us all the list of what we do when we are painting. This is exactly what I'm aiming at. The accompanying discourse also details the historical surroundings, commissions, histories, assessments, the context of production and artistic environment, and sometimes also the social or even socio-political issues at stake. Of course, it opens up onto related themes, the place of women in society and gender issues, racial domination, I'll give you an example, sexual exploitation, environmental issues, tradition, and innovation. The recognition of women's artistic abilities and status, visibility and invisibility. This is the case, for instance, of Pauline Botte in Alice Smith's Autumn. I'll show you a picture afterwards. And her painting of scandalous Christine Keeler in the swinging 60s. Art history is warped, used to promote gender and social mores and choices. In How to Be Both by Alice Smith, the gender issue also is at stake when the painter Del Cosa is no longer Francesco, but Francesca, disguised as Francesco. As an aside, this type of hybrid novels could be thought to compare with well-documented historical novels, but they are very different from historical novels, because in history, like the story of Thomas Cromwell and Anne Boleyn and all that, history is in the background also, but it's all part of that, like Alexandre Dumas, his novels as well. They are not really intrinsically related to the very writing stuff of the novel. I mean, no technical details, terms, or meta references to history writing are part of its very substance. I give another counter example, The Painter's Daughter, which is a book about the daughters of Gainsborough, Gainsborough's daughters. But Gainsborough is in the background, and the importance is a story of his daughters. So they are like a painted, well, they are the painted figures, but there's nothing related to the way it's done, to all that. So I'll go quicker on that, which is not the case with the novels I will refer to. In the kind of those novels we could call pictorial novels or artistic novels or even art historical novels, the main plot is devoted to painting in action, in the foreground. It's life, as it were, and is one of the main actants, as we used to call them. We're not talking about only a series of separate individual ekphrasis included in a novel, Camille-like, but of the kind of novel, the backbone of which is the discourse on art, its history and its description constituting the focal point and a way of structuring the novel. I think Yes. No, this is well, I'll go later. So you have some of the instances you see. I put, and I'll go back, and this is the Keeler voting and Belmondo, you may see. So I'll come back to that as well. Right. Stephen Cheeke evokes art historical references. Of course, on the literary side, fiction focuses the reader's attention on another plot, be it biographical or mystery, a quest, or a thriller. Clues pave the way of reading as seeing, a voyeur, what I call a voyeur, but the actual main plot is hovering over the text as its way, is dedicated to art writing, on art, for art, and of art. That is, being spellbound in front of painting, unable not to look at it, the reader finds he or she is lost in contemplation, fascinated by art, its history and techniques. Now, I'm going to go quickly through the examples I showed here. First, all the colors of the dark, I'm trying to sum up, they are all 2025, excepted Jesse Kellerman 1982, but they're all very recent books, you know. In All the Colors of the Dark, to put it simply, the story is about Patch, the main character who has only one eye and wears a patch, and he is abducted, stays with the girl, and the girl disappears, and the whole thing is trying to find her. But to find her, he has to paint her, whereas he never saw her because they were in the dark. They're all the colors of the dark. So he keeps painting and painting, helped by somebody, it's in America in a gallery, and it's the making of the painting which helps to find her or not. You have to read it. It's a very good book. The portrait painter is the portrait artist is a very good one as well. An extraordinary book. It's set up in Victorian times. It focuses on how a dead artist, the work of a dead artist, keeps appearing nightly on the door sill of the London National Gallery or of the Royal Academy. And an Oxford retired professor of art history and his daughter are joined by a painter's model, and they have to try and decide on their authenticity or not. And so there's a whole thing developing, who painted them. They think it's the painter is Timothy Pandon Hall, who signed the paintings, but actually the paintings are signed on the Hall. So who is the real painter? And the paintings are painted with wax. I won't tell you more because you can read the painting, but it's very nice. And it's also about women's condition in Victorian times and maybe in our times as well. And what is interesting in this book is that you have the 10 paintings are the subject of Ekphrasis in a very, very precise way. I'll show you, are they here? So this is All the Colors of the Dark. You have an instance of the vocabulary, the lexis, and all the lighter wash, dark values, canvas, burnt amber, everything, the brush, and the painting is complete. So you have everything here also. And then, no, that's not one. The portrait artist too. You see also, it's very, it's the sort of a competent character. They're talking, it's stylistic flourishes, reminiscent, inundated composition of the corners, between the portrait. Well, it's like an art historian writing about it also. So it goes on for 10 times as a kind of series of portraits. I'm trying to be quick. So there's a kind of, what is interesting is that the technique of the painter, I'm not going to tell you who's done those, is a hybrid medium. And the painter is hybrid. So you must read this one, it's good. Okay. In Les Yeux de Mona, it's a systematic book as well, because it's very popular in France. You can find it in supermarkets and all that, and there's an English translation of it. It's a book in which a grandfather has a nice little granddaughter, 10-year-old, and she's starting to be blind. She risks being blind forever. So what he wants her to see is the beauty of the world. And he takes her to Orsay, Le Louvre, etc., for her to see paintings. So every single Wednesday, in France, Wednesday afternoon are children's days, he takes her to Orsay, for instance, or to Le Louvre to see Mona Lisa. And he describes the painting to her. And so Fleischer, who wrote that, is an art historian. And so there's a feeble sort of thread, the thread of, running the risk of being. But then, and inside the book, you have the reproduction of all the paintings, enormous number of paintings in Oxford, Monet, Manet, and whatever, all those, and Picasso, and he describes. I mean, it's very popular and people like that. I mean, the description of the paintings and all that, that's incredible. So that's interesting also for that. That's it also. I quoted How to Be Both, which also describes, you see the Palazzo Schifanoia in Ferrara, which is fantastic. And the man in white, you can see it on the left, and the other one is the graceful young man you described. So they are main characters for the people there. And the man in white, this being Alice Smith, is a migrant workers for her. So something like that, which we find in Autumn, which is the first Brexit novel. And in Autumn, so you've got all this description. I'm going very quickly, I'm sorry, but it's a panorama. And in Autumn, well, you see the paintings are by David Hockney, of course. And then you have a description of Pauline Boty, who was a beautiful girl in the 60s, 63, something like that, and who died of cancer after giving birth to her daughter. But she was very famous. She was photographed and all that. And she was animated. And she painted this, which is Christine Keeler, who was 1920, who was one of, I would say, one of the mistresses of Profumo, who was a minister. State minister. So there was a big scandal and all that. And her paintings, you can see her on top of that, her paintings were sort of lost. Her family didn't like them, so they put them in a barn where they were rediscovered. A few existed. We have one in Pompidou, and I saw some. There was an exhibition 15 years ago, 20 years ago, on pop art, and she was there. She was in it, But we discovered more, but some are lost because nobody considered her to be a major artist. Food for thought. Another instance is in Jesse Kellerman's Killer, The Brutal Art, where the main character is a gallery owner, and he discovers paintings by a man who actually is copied on Henry Darger. And this man died, and actually they discovered loads and loads and loads and loads of drawings which are now in Brooklyn, in the Musée de Paris, and several places, but packets of them in his place in Chicago. And the detective story is called The Brutal Art, but he is an outsider art, as they say in English, but in French we say l'art brut. So Jesse Kellerman borrowed that for his book. So again, it's a you have the descriptions, the matter, everything here. And one last example. So this is the brutal art, and you can see the ekphrasis, one of the many ekphrasis here, and assessment of that. So I'll go back to those if you like. Yeah, and that's last one, seriously, because then I've got to develop the rest. Sirius Veld, who you know, in The Blindfold, there's a very famous passage when she describes Giorgione, the Tempest, and she does not describe, she omits the man on the left. What is interesting is that she wrote a few years afterwards, Mysteries of the Rectangle, essays in paintings, and there she quotes. She writes about Giorgione, but she quotes also what she had done before in the book, where she forgot about the man and what it meant, because her PhD supervisor told her, you haven't forgotten something in your description. Okay, I found this twofold example a telling instance of the porosity between art history writing and fiction writing. The same artist recalls an event she used in her first novel and uses again 13 years later when writing in a different genre of writing, no longer a piece of fiction. But she completes her first perusal of the painting when the ekphrasis of the man on the left with the staff Iris had omitted, Iris the character. She then quotes the interpretation the character of Paris gave in her novel, that is, Iris's eyes were drawn inside the picture to look through the man's eyes, then she became the man's double. I forgot him because I had become him. That is what I call the admonitor, after Louis Marin, making us enter the painting and seeing what the character designates to us. So those examples illustrate my efforts at trying to offer classification of ekphrasis according to the various functions and literary works, like narrative ekphrasis, ekphrasis and emotions, ekphrasis and artistic practice, ekphrasis in the painter's studio. The last item and critical ekphrasis were declined at art criticism and second order ekphrasis and heuristic ekphrasis, linking text with knowledge and discovery. This is what will be of interest here. We have to re-examine critical ekphrasis and move on towards a reconfiguration. Among the various types of ekphrasis I have tried to distinguish, I will put forward that if in this type of novels examined here, first order ekphrasis do figure, second order figure and prevail. They designate not only the intermedial art transposition, but also a narrative, and a second order creative means the learned representation of work of art. That is a discipline on top of another discipline. So this is an encounter between two disciplines, art history and literature, a hybrid form when it borrows from another one. The vocabulary, references, everything I've been telling you. The first step being the description of the painting, its subject, interpretation. The second, the introduction of its history, material description, composition, which offers a sort of twin narrative. Then one could qualify this type of ekphrasis as critical creative ekphrasis when it adopts the lingo of research about historical and contextual origin and so on and so forth. According to Stephen Cheeke, ekphrasis then is an example both of the creative act itself, secondary critical act, a moment of significant creation, subject itself to critical commentary and appreciation, a moment of criticism, a response to disagreement or correction. Differing from narrative ekphrasis, you can see that's all completely different. So we could inaugurate a new literary genre. That is what I propose to call the artistic novel or the art historical novel. Art history is written. So I'm going to well, Bernard Vuillaume, who is also one of our interesting writers in French, talked about the cognitive efficacy of fiction. And I translate, is it possible then to gather writings on art in a class or at least in a generic configuration? Generic configuration opens up a new theoretical range of word-image relation, encompassing the multiplicity of possible modalities of artistic uses and art-related genre. Now, furthermore, there's the question of art history writing, and art history, when I was a student and I did some art history in Paris, there was a big revolution and all that, and afterwards the sequel was art history. It's not art history, it's art science, it's science, scientific. Well, this is all the heritage of the 19th century, where positivism was the rage, and you have to be a positivist even in history. And John Berger, you know, saw art as instrumentalized as well. The art of the past no longer exists as it once did. Its authority is lost. In its place, there is a language of images. What matters now is who uses that language for what purpose. This is why, and this is the only reason why, the entire art of the past has now become a political issue. Now, I disagree with language of images, but anyway, I like John Berger. Now, what happens is that for this reconfiguration and rethinking the status of Ekphrasis, I needed some kind of help. Now, I discovered, and I wrote about that, about a crossing of boundaries and reconfiguration. I was helped in this thanks to the encounters I mentioned at the beginning of this talk of the works of Jablonka, Michael Riffaterre, Hayden White, Stephen Cheeke, and of course, Mitchell, remember it, Mitchell's pictorial term. But I'm going to propose an ekphrastic term, realizing the massive presence of art quotation and art historical presence. I proposed the pictorial art historical novel. Now, why do I do this? Hayden White and Jablonka are the tenants of ego history, like Pierre Nora and Michael history, Carlo Gainsbourg. Now, the interesting point is that for Hayden White, Hayden White held that history is written, okay? And so history for him consists in a narrative, using narrative form, appointed chaired with historiography. It borrowed the tools from literature and rhetoric, like tropes, figures of style, such as symbol, synecdoche, metonymies, metaphors, a metaphor like circuit, speaking of deep structure versus surface structure, even envisaging the end of history. He elaborated the concept of emplotment. That is the fact of using precious narrative techniques in history writing, organizing facts and events according to plots and giving them a logic, ordering them according to the date he found, which of course could be criticized. He showed that history writing often resorted to literary genre like comedy, tragedy, romance, or satire. For White, the narrative has an explanatory function. It also is a cognitive instrument for Louis Menck, which tallies with my colleague Vuillaume's own conclusion. Jablonka is a French scholar in social sciences and history. He wrote, "L'histoire est une littérature contemporaine." History is a contemporary literature, which, true to its title, develops a theory of the use of literature in writing history. The theory is also applied in his recent proposal of the concept of the third continent. That is, it's a spatial geographic metaphor which illustrates a discipline located in between literature and social sciences. For Jablonka, history always is a narrative consisting in choosing the facts and the events it relates, like White. History, their interpretation and re-evaluation. So research turns an inward eye onto its own forms, its ways and means. The third continent is the space where literature meets social sciences and academic disciplines. Research and creation are allied and no longer opposed. They collaborate and are rich in cognitive and heuristic mores. True to his theory, Jablonka wrote L'histoire des grands-parents que je n'ai pas eus. It's a narrative organizing the data he had collected, both on the macro and the micro level, about the tragic destiny of his grandparents killed in Shoah. It was also a way of making the academic discipline more accessible to the general public. The book was a success for andbreaking, who wrote about Jablonka. In those two books, and the one dedicated to Laetitia ou la fin des hommes, a problem with a young girl, I'll let you read that, but you see that rigorous pursuit of evidence-based novel knowledge, a new approach to spotting the divide between literature and the social sciences. Now, this is what I'm going to try and reverse the process. A cross-process, his third continent. It will cross the borders to produce a constellation, hence the constellation here. I imagine surrounding Ekphrasis, thus relying on expanded Ekphrasis. A generic constellation reconfiguring Ekphrasis. I'm almost done. Just 2 pages. Historians Yvan Jablonka, Hayden White, but also Pierre Nora and his concept of ego history, to quote just a few researchers, have envisaged to reverse the terms and the classic use of their discipline, that is to choose interdisciplinarity and accept the porosity between social sciences and the possibility of their collaborating together, that is to assume hyphenated identities. For Pierre Nora, it can't be clearer, quote, the ego history concept was born from the cross-fertilization of 2 major movements. On the one hand, the upsetting undermining of the myth of historical objectivity, dear to the 19th century, and on the other, the historians choosing to focus on the present. When Jablonka chose the conceptual metaphor of the third document to illustrate this cross-fertilization of history and literature, Hayden White chose to speak of employment, as I showed. We could then propose to reverse our usual process, that is resorting to the same mechanism as Jablonka and White used, but this time starting from a literary creation to acknowledge the massive presence of art history written in it. That is starting from literature to recognize the significant importance of the presence of art writing, of art history, and not in history recognizing its literary depth. Then this cross-fertilized instance of intermedial references could constitute a fully fledged autonomous kind of genre of art history inspired writing. This would be the case when concentrating on the techniques used by art history in a specific work of art, be it real or notional, or on the characteristics of a school of painting, debating aesthetic choices and going deeper into a painter's creative interrogations, deep into discussions between art historians, critics, gallery owners, painters, museum curators, amateurs, and so on and so forth. So these could be referred to as elements of the constellation. So this is what I propose as a critical instance of intermediality when art, critique, and history are interwoven and plotted with narration in a work of fiction to which they collaborate in a significant intrinsic way. The literary fictional text developing prose ekphrasis, quoting Cheeke, ekphrasis being understood as extended, expanded, so as to constitute a constellation, including not only descriptions, but all kinds of art historical language and data, art historical literary prose. Thus, the reader can partake of a double or threefold discipline, one of them belonging to social sciences. So maybe I am on the brink of finding an answer to my long-standing quest, concentrating on extended or expanded critical ekphrasis, which are close to art history, a pictorial or art historical novel needing a proper ekphrasis reconfiguration. I propose to look up at the sky and not at the earth this time, to choose an appropriate exploratory metaphor and to propose the constellation, ekphrasis constellation, and also to move on to an ekphrastic turn when word and image are so much present on our screens and life and books and other apparatuses with the game, and open up onto future critical theory, a reconfiguration indeed. Now, this is what I offer. I'm not very good at doing, I still have to improve. But anyway, you have the way I can see that, you see. And I need more spots, but I didn't know how to make them. So I have to learn. So you have all types and the ekphrastic turn, which is a constellation. And we have critical ekphrasis, narrative, artist ekphrasis, emotion, art historical ekphrasis. Ekphrasis at work, or I quoted at the beginning, I tried to say in the first book. That's it.